Welcome to Front Office Pros. We are back in giving out our report cards for the NFC teams. Our last video, we gave report cards out for all of the AFC teams. Now we're going to be talking about the NFC teams. Before we get started, we want you to put in the comments below which NFL NFC conference team do you think has had the best offseason so far?
Hike!
All right, so we are first going to be starting with the NFC East. The Philadelphia Eagles, the representative Super Bowl team from the NFC that lost. They had a lot of moves that took place for this team. Some key additions for them. They were able to sign cornerback James Bradbury, retain cornerback Darius Slay, re-sign center Jason Kelsey, re-signed defensive tackle Fletcher Cox, re-signed defensive end Brandon Graham, signed quarterback Marcus Mariota to be their new backup, and running back Rashad Penny. Some key departures for them. They lost safety C.J. Gardner-Johnson, defensive tackle Javon Hargrave, running back Miles Sanders, offensive tackle Andre Dillard, interior offensive lineman Isaac Seumalo, linebacker T.J. Edwards, and linebacker Kaiser White. Some other notable players that remain unsigned are defensive end Robert Quinn, defensive tackle Ndamukong Suh, and defensive tackle Linval Joseph. So, Joe, what grade do you give the Philadelphia Eagles?
Yeah, I'm giving them a C+. You know, a lot of their additions were re-signs, and they were key re-signs. You know, it's big for them to get Bradbury and Darius Slay back. Jason Kelsey deciding not to retire and come back was a huge move for them. But, you know, I was just disappointed that they didn't end up bringing C.J. Gardner-Johnson back and figuring out a way to get that contract done. I mean, he was on he ended up going on a cheap deal to the Lions, for 1 year, prove-it deal. I would have given him a higher grade had they done that. Then, Rashad Penny signing was a little confusing to me. He's just an injury-riddled guy to sign him. They lose Miles Sanders. Just kind of interesting to see what the Eagles are doing.
Yeah, for me, I gave them a B-, and honestly, the reason why is because they just had so many players available, and I think they did a pretty good job with keeping a good portion of them. Like you mentioned, they lost C.J. Gardner-Johnson. That's a big loss. They lost both linebackers in T.J. Edwards and Kaiser White. Both had really good years. And they lost Isaac Seumalo, who did really well for them last season, and running back Miles Sanders. So, I mean, there were a lot of losses. Anytime you go to the Super Bowl, you could possibly expect this type of loss. But for them to be able to kind of retain some of their core players that they've really had for years in Kelsey, Fletcher Cox, and Brandon Graham, I thought that was really great. They kept their corners in Bradbury and Slay, which were probably one of the best cornerback duos in the entire league. So I think that they weathered the storm pretty well, and that's why I gave them a B-. It'll be interesting because they do have some players that they drafted last year that I have to think they're hoping will step up coming into, year two. You've got linebacker Nakobe Dean. He was basically redshirted last year. He now has a clear shot at being the starting linebacker with both of the other guys now gone. He had defensive tackle Jordan Davis as well. Now Javon Hargrave is gone. Could expect him to have more of a full-time role. Wasn't as involved as I thought he might be. And then you also have got that, I believe, Cam Jurgens, interior offensive lineman. They had talked about him being the replacement for Kelsey, but, Kelsey had such a great year last year, and he's still there. So he probably goes into guard and now is going to play for Seumalo. So they have a couple rookies that they drafted last year that will be able to kind of plug up those holes. But, they are, not proven yet. So just because they were high draft picks doesn't mean that they're going to do, well for them. But I think overall they did a pretty good job.
Yeah, they definitely did. And, as you mentioned, losing players when you make it Super Bowl is expected. They just didn't seem to have a good backup plan for losing Gardner-Johnson. That's where, I get the other positions they have depth at, but that's the one player. And then they also lost Marcus Epps as well. So, I feel like he would have been good to get him back last year. And he led the league in interceptions last year at the position too.
Yeah, one guy I think I forgot to mention that list. They also signed safety Terrell Edmonds, so maybe he'll try to replace those safeties. But you're right, losing two starting safeties with Epps and Gardner Johnson, they're going to have to address that position in the draft. So going over to the Dallas Cowboys, the Cowboys tagged running back Tony Pollard. They traded for wide receiver Brandon Cooks and cornerback Stephon Gilmore. They were able to re-sign safety Donovan Wilson, linebacker Leighton Vander Esch, defensive end Dante Fowler, and quarterback Cooper Rush. They also signed running back Ronald Jones. Some notable departures for them. They lost tight end Dalton Schultz, interior offensive lineman Connor McGovern, and wide receiver Noah Brown. And some notable players that remain unsigned. They released running back Ezekiel Elliott, and they have cornerback Anthony Brown. Both of them still free agents. So, Joe, what grade do you give the Dallas Cowboys?
Yeah, I'm giving the Cowboys a B for their, offseason moves. Obviously tagging Tony Pollard was huge for them, especially since, they released Ezekiel Elliott, and it's going to be nice to see him take over the leadership role there. They traded for Brandon Cooks. I thought that was a pretty interesting move, seeing how they have Gallup, and I feel like they're similar players. Stephon Gilmore, he had a pretty good year with the Colts last year. I actually like that acquisition for him, especially after losing Anthony Brown. And then they were able to bring back Vander Esch and Dante Fowler too. So, they haven't done anything. They haven't signed real big name players. But I feel like they've had a solid offseason so far.
Yeah, I was teetering between giving them a B, but I ultimately gave them a B plus. I think part of the reason why I did was I think adding Brandon Cooks and Stephon Gilmore via trade, I think, that veteran leadership they're going to bring into this team, I think could really help. CeeDee Lamb had a great year last year, but I definitely think they could have used a stronger supporting cast around him. I know there was much scrutiny about them trading away Amari Cooper because of cap reasons. Now Cooks isn't Amari Cooper, but I definitely think Cooks brings a new element to that offense that is, very much needed. And then for Gilmore, I don't know how much more he has left in the tank, but, having him and Trayvon Diggs as corners, starting corners, I think that's going to be a good pairing for them. So we'll have to see. I was a little surprised that they cut Zeke. He's beloved by Jerry Jones. I didn't think they would end up doing that. I'm not a huge Ronald Jones fan. I think they're going to have to address this position because Tony Pollard has never had over 200 carries, and he just, broke his leg. So, I don't think that's reasonable for him to carry that whole workload next year. I know some fantasy managers want that to be the case. I just don't think it's realistic, especially when you hear, and who knows if we should take this as truthful or not, but you hear Mike McCarthy saying he wants to run the football. So,
yeah, I'll believe Mike McCarthy running the football when I see it, but I do think they're going to end up addressing the running back position in the draft. I think them releasing Zeke was a smart move. Just that's a lot of money to pay a guy that you basically just use around the goal line. He's just kind of that short yardage back at this point.
The New York Giants were able to tag running back Saquon Barkley, sign quarterback Daniel Jones to a long-term extension, trade for tight end Darren Waller. They signed linebacker Bobby Okereke, signed wide receiver Darius Slayton and Sterling Shepard, and then signed wide receiver Paris Campbell. Some notable departures for them: offensive lineman Nick Gates and safety Julian Love. And then some notable players that remain unsigned. They released wide receiver Kenny Golladay. So, Joe, what grade do you give the New York Giants?
Yeah, Steve, I'm giving the Giants an A minus. I really like how they were, what they did with Daniel Jones and Saquon Barkley, figuring out a way to get both of them back. That was huge. And then they've gone out and traded for tight end Darren Waller. We'll see if he can rebound after a disappointing year last year, but he's, proved himself to be one of the top tight ends in the league with the Raiders. And then I really like them bringing in Okereke at linebacker. He's really talented, makes a lot of plays for the Colts last year. He's a good addition to that defense. But the one area, that really could have got me possibly to that A-plus range was if they did something differently with this wide receiver room. That, they bring back two existing guys that they have. I do like Slayton, but Shepard's just not available enough. Paris Campbell's interesting, but he's also a guy that's had his injury troubles as well for the Colts.
Yeah, I also gave the Giants an A minus, and I really like what they did. Being able to keep Saquon Barkley on the tag and making that trade for Darren Waller, I think that he's going to have a rebounded year this year with the Giants. So they'll be the number one target for Daniel Jones. And so I think bringing a guy like Waller was necessary. They needed a big body target for that offense. So I'm excited to see, what Brian Daboll has cooked up for Darren Waller as far as their game plan, going forward. I also like Bobby Okereke as well, or Okereke. We have to figure out what the way to say that, but he's a great linebacker. Giants have had desperate need for a linebacker for quite some time. He's going to fit in really nicely. They had Jalen Smith, as their starting linebacker, some of last year, and he was a good player at one time, but there was a reason why he was cut by the Cowboys. So I think he's going to really just help that defense immensely. The thing for the reason why I didn't give them an A or an A plus is I just didn't like that Daniel Jones extension. I understand it's a quarterback league, and Daniel Jones had a great year with Daboll, and could this just be the tip of the iceberg for him? But I just think the amount they paid for him was way too much. I know they can get out of it. And who knows? I think eventually they're going to have to address the quarterback position. But to me, I would not have given them that extension, and I think that's a mistake by them.
Yeah, I disagree. I don't think that the extension was that bad. I mean, given how much the number was for the franchise tag, and then even say they want to franchise him next year, that number goes up by 120% once you tag him again. So I actually didn't think the $40 million was that bad, considering the cap number was $32 million this year, and we don't really know what would only go up from there next year as well. And like you said, they can get out of that extension, so I didn't really have a problem with the way they structured that.
The Washington Commanders were able to re-sign defensive tackle Daron Payne to a long-term deal. They signed offensive tackle Andrew Wiley, quarterback Jacoby Brissett to be a backup to possibly Sam Howell as their starter, offensive lineman Nick Gates, and linebacker Cody Barton. Some departures for them, linebacker Cole Holcomb and quarterback Taylor Heineke. And some notable players that remain unsigned. They released quarterback Carson Wentz, running back J.D. McKissick, and linebacker John Bostic. So, Joe, what grade do you give the Washington Commanders?
Yeah, I'm giving the Commanders a B plus for their offseason moves, Steve. I know you're kind of scratch your head on this one for the Commanders, but I just like, they haven't done anything like huge, but being able to bring back Daron Payne was big for this team. And then I actually like them bringing in Jacoby Brissett. He's just a solid backup quarterback in the league, and he's shown that he can, hold the ship and win games for you when called upon. And Cody Barton, I really like. He's a guy that played really well last year with the Seahawks, flew all over the field. You were questioning this, but I just like what they've done. They've kind of just, shored up offensive and defensive side of the ball, depth-wise. And it's nothing flashy, but it's a solid offseason for the Commanders.
Yeah, I definitely don't feel the same way you do on this one. I gave them a C grade. I just feel like they are competing with the rest of this division. And, you could say the Eagles got worse, but they kind of offsetted that. I think they counterbalanced it. But the other teams, Dallas and New York, definitely got better. Washington was, kind of looking on the outside in, not making the playoffs last year. So this is a competitive division based on 2022 season. So I like they were able to keep Daron Payne. I think that's a definite win, but I just feel like they should have done more, and they didn't do more. I like linebacker Cody Barton, but I think linebacker Cole Holcomb is better, and they let Cole Holcomb walk. So for me, I just feel like they kind of stayed the same or possibly regressed. I mean, it's a chase right now to be the top of the NFC East, and they really did nothing. The one thing I do like, and that's the reason why I didn't give them even worse grade, is I like Eric Bieniemy coming in as assistant coach and offensive coordinator. I know there is a lot of fanfare as to why he hasn't been given a head coaching job and all of that. I won't get into that, but what I will say is I think that it will be a great opportunity for him to really run that offense. They've got some pieces, but not as good of pieces as Kansas City. I think he is going to be in line to be a head coach at some point, possibly even after the season. But I think it's going to be a good thing for both Bieniemy and the team.
Yeah, definitely. That I forgot about Bieniemy, but he was another big reason I gave them a B plus. And then they go out and shirt up the offensive line for him, and it'll be exciting to see what plays he's going to draw up for that offense.
So heading over to the NFC North, the Minnesota Vikings key additions. They signed defensive end Marcus Davenport, cornerback Byron Murphy, was able to re-sign running back Alexander Madison, and center Garrett Bradbury. Some notable departures for them. They lost defensive tackle Delvin Tomlinson, wide receiver Adam Thielen, quarterback Patrick Peterson, and linebacker Eric Kendricks, and tight end Irv Smith. And there really are no notable players that remain unsigned. So, Joe, what grade do you give the Minnesota Vikings?
Yeah, giving them a B minus. I really like the addition they brought in with Marcus Davenport, and Byron Murphy should be a big upgrade for them too, with the secondary that was absolutely horrible last year and definitely needed some reconfiguring. He's a younger player and he plays really good man-to-man defense, and then being able to bring back Madison for running back depth for Delvin Cook. There was rumors about them possibly trading him. We'll see what happens. And then being able to retain Garrett Bradbury was pretty big for them as well.
Yeah, I wasn't as favorable as your grade was. I gave them a C plus. And to me, the reason why is I feel like the talent they're letting walk out the door is a lot better than what they're bringing in. I think Eric Kendricks has been a mainstay for them. Maybe they believe that linebacker Brian Asamoah is ready to step in and be that starter. And if they think that, then they've got to do what they believe is best. But, Thielen has been a big time talent for them, local to Minnesota. I think he probably would have been willing to take a pay cut, decided just to move away from him. They really need to bring other talent in besides Justin Jefferson. He's really like the one-man show. I mean, I know they have KJ Osborne, but they're going to have to address that position in the draft. I do like Byron Murphy a lot. That secondary is not good. But they did also lose Patrick Peterson. So, and what isn't being mentioned here is Zadarius Smith looms large, right? So there was some posting that he was ready to leave, and there was like, well, no, we're not cutting him. But it seems like he's going to be I mean, maybe they'll figure something out, but it's definitely a strong possibility he's not with the team either. So they do a 1-year prove-it deal with Marcus Davenport, but there's no guarantee that he's going to be able to recreate the production that Zadarius Smith has done for them.
Yeah, I don't really have as big a problem with their departures just because a lot of those players are older. I think it's honestly could work out for them to move on, and it's time to get some new energy and some young blood into that team that desperately needs it.
The Detroit Lions signed safety C.J. Gardner-Johnson, running back David Montgomery, cornerback Cameron Sutton was able to re-sign linebacker Alex Anzalone, defensive tackle John Kaminsky, and signed quarterback Emmanuel Mosley and wide receiver Marvin Jones. Some key departures for them were running back Jamal Williams and wide receiver DJ Chark. And some notable players that remain unsigned as defensive tackle Michael Brockers. So, Joe, and I know you like the Lions, so what grade did you give them?
Yeah, I do like the Lions, Steve. Dan Campbell, they're just an exciting young team. I love the passion and energy they play with. And I think they've done some really good things this offseason. I'm going to give them an A for what they've done. Bringing in C.J. Gardner-Johnson, really love that move, especially they got him a lot cheaper than I thought they could on a 1-year prove-it deal. I think David Montgomery is a nice depth piece to have at running back because you can't really rely on Swift. I know that meant, moving on from Jamal Williams, who I also liked, but Montgomery could give you a little more. And then Emmanuel Mosley was a great signing for the secondary as well at corner. I really like that move.
Yeah, I gave the Lions an A-. I think they've done a really good job this offseason. I'm with you. Bringing in safety C.J. Gardner-Johnson is a great addition to that secondary. Should help them out immensely. And I do, it's going to be hard seeing Jamal Williams go. I mean, he just was the epitome of that Lions team last year and all those touchdowns. I think he was going to be in for regression no matter what, anyways. But David Montgomery can definitely handle the load. And Montgomery is able to not only run the rock, but he's a much better pass catcher than Jamal Williams is. So to me, I think this, David Montgomery addition, I think could be really good for this team. So I don't think they'll lose a step. If anything, they actually will probably add another aspect to their offense that they didn't have before. With DJ Chark going, I do like Chark, but you got to hope that Jameson Williams takes that step next year. They've got Amon-Ra St. Brown. So overall, I think to me they're big additions. I was really happy with.
Yeah, definitely. Without DJ Chark there, their wide receiver room is a little crowded. It's going to be really interesting to see how Jameson Williams does now that they've kind of cleared a path for him and a route to more snaps on the field.
The Green Bay Packers decided to add basically nobody of note to talk about. They have let wide receiver Alan Lazard leave in free agency, as well as defensive tackle Jerron Reed, tight end Robert Tonyan, and interior defensive lineman Dean Lowry. Not to mention that the Aaron Rodgers saga looms large, and we believe he will be traded to the New York Jets. But the Packers and the Jets are playing a good game of chess, and we're trying to figure out what's going to happen here. So Aaron Rodgers is the hostage right now. And some notable players that remain unsigned for them are safety Adrian Amos, wide receiver Randall Cobb, and kicker Mason Crosby. So, Joe, what grade do you give the Green Bay Packers?
Yeah, I'm giving them a D-. I feel like they've really just botched this Aaron Rodgers thing. They're letting it drag on for forever here. And then essentially it feels like they're just letting them hold them hostage still because they really, like you mentioned, haven't added anybody. And I feel like the whole Aaron Rodgers thing has, something to do with it. But, if you're going to lose Aaron Rodgers, I mean, got to make some moves. This team's got to get better unless they just don't plan on being that competitive with Jordan Love this year. I don't really know, but I would be really disappointed with this offseason if I was a Packers fan.
Yeah, I gave the Packers a C-. I was close to giving them a lower grade, but I think some of the reasons why I did was I know the Packers aren't big players in free agency. I think maybe 1 year they made big splashes, but normally they're not a big player, so I'm not that surprised. There are teams that just are not free agency players. I do think it was a good move by them to have some restraint and not sign Alan Lazard to the contract that the Jets gave him. I think that was an overpayment. So I think that was wise by them. And I think at the end of the day, the reason why I gave them this C- is I am expecting Aaron Rodgers to get traded, and I'm expecting them to get some sort of return. And although I think they have botched it, and I think they could have done this a lot better, I do somewhat commend them to kind of passing the baton to Jordan Love. They drafted him with a first-round pick. He's been waiting, for this opportunity. And I'm not sure if he'll be any good, but at this point, Rodgers is getting, closer to retirement. And it's just been a nightmare these past few seasons. So, give Jordan Love the keys to the car. Hopefully you get a first-round pick. If not, maybe you get multiple seconds or something and try to, reimagine what this Packers team will look like. So at the end of the day, I gave him a C-, but in the event this Rodgers trade doesn't go down, we're looking more into the D territory for sure.
Yeah, I mean, they'll definitely get a first-round pick in this Aaron Rodgers deal. I mean, I think partially the holdup was they've been asking for, 2 first-round picks, but there's no way they're trading Rodgers without getting at least a, 1 first-round pick in the mix.
The Chicago Bears have had a busy offseason. Of note, their biggest move was, trading out of the number 1 overall pick with the Carolina Panthers, and in exchange got a boatload of picks as well as wide receiver DJ Moore. They also signed linebacker Tremaine Edmonds and linebacker TJ Edwards, interior defensive lineman DeMarcus Walker, offensive lineman Nate Davis, quarterback PJ Walker to be a backup for Justin Fields, running back Deonta Foreman, and tight end Robert Tonyan. Some key departures for them were running back David Montgomery and offensive tackle Riley Reif. And some notable players that remain unsigned, there's really only one, which would be wide receiver N'Keal Harry, who is a free agent. So Joe, what grade do you give the Chicago Bears?
Yeah, I love what the Bears have done this off season. They're getting my highest grade in an A+. I love the move for them to trade out of that first round pick. They got a good haul, including them getting wide receiver DJ Moore from the Panthers, which was a really solid move and boosts up their wide receiver room that desperately needed it. They really just had Darnell Mooney. Then they had acquired Claypool from the Steelers last year as well. But other than that, they really had nobody else. And then their linebacker room, they let Roquan Smith, they traded him to Baltimore last year, but then them getting Tremaine Edwards and TJ Edwards, I really like that at the linebacker spot. And then, I like Deontay Foreman, who they also got from the Panthers, to add some running back depth. I'd expect that they would address that in the draft as well.
Yeah, I also gave the Chicago Bears an A+. I think they've really done a good job this offseason. I think that trade package that they were able to agree to with the Carolina Panthers was probably the main reason why I gave them this grade. I think DJ Moore is a very talented player. Thus will by far be the best quarterback he's ever paired with. And honestly, the contract extension that the Panthers gave him that now the Bears will be inheriting is really a generous. I mean, it's a decent contract. It's not like an overpayment by any means. So it's a pretty favorable one that the Bears are taking on, and they're able to, bring in a lot of draft capital. I really like Tremaine Edmonds, as a Bills fan. He doesn't always show up in the stat sheet, but he's great in coverage, and he's still super young. I know they gave him a lot of money, but, he should really perform for them in the middle of that defense. I'm excited to see what Eberflus does with him being the center of that defense. One, I guess, knock you could say about them, you kind of mentioned the Roquan Smith kind of, I'd say, snafu. I know they able to get, I believe, a second-round pick for him when they traded him. But you just have to wonder, would have been better off just to keep Roquan Smith instead of having Tremaine Edmonds and TJ Edwards. But in the end, I think their moves have just been overly positive. And even though they lost David Montgomery, I think they'll address that position. And I just don't think he was a fit for that team. They really have already kind of came out and said that he wasn't. And, I don't think Khalil Herbert will be the one and only part of that offense. I think I said they'll bring a running back in during the draft. But overall, they've done a really good job.
Yeah, definitely. Like you said, the one confusing thing was definitely the Roquan Smith thing. But, I didn't have a problem with them giving Tremaine Edmonds a lot of money just because they had so much money to come in with free agency. You got to land some top-notch players, and they overpaid, but they got their guys. Just wonder if for whatever reason, I don't know how it's possible, but maybe Roquan didn't fit what Eberflus wanted to do on defense.
So transitioning over to the NFC South, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers were able to re-sign cornerback Jamel Dean, linebacker Levante David. They also signed quarterback Baker Mayfield, defensive tackle Greg Gaines, and running back Chase Edmonds. Some key departures for them were defensive tackle Raheem Nunez-Roches and cornerback Sean Murphy-Bunting. Some notable players that remain unsigned for them are running back Leonard Fournette, offensive tackle Donovan Smith, which both were released by them, defensive tackle Akeem Hicks, tight end Cameron Brate, wide receiver Julio Jones, and safety Logan Ryan. So what grade do you give the Tampa Bay Bucs, Joe?
Yeah, I'm giving them a B-. With Brady retiring this offseason, it really put a damper on their cap space with the amount of dead cap that they had to take on. But I like that the players are able to bring back. I think that's big for them, and I think Baker Mayfield is a solid signing. We'll see, who ends up winning the quarterback battle there between him and Trask this offseason. They haven't done any big additions, but they don't have the cap space too, and I like the guys they brought back.
Yeah, I'm with you. People don't realize I'll say the bill that Brady left them with because of the many restructures with his contract. All the void money that he had remaining on his deal, ends up hitting their salary cap this year. So I thought that they were going to have to make like a good amount of cuts and really just kind of retool this team because of it. But I don't know how they did it, but they were able to do it, I think, very well without really losing anybody I would think too much of note. Keeping some of their main guys like Jamel Dean and Levante David. And I'm with you with Baker Mayfield. We'll see. I don't know if he's going to end up being a premier starter in this league. I thought his career was kind of done, and then he really showed a lot of great flashes with the Rams, which is now giving him the opportunity to get another chance to be a starting quarterback. But for them and for this team, I don't really know what other option they could have went after because of their cap space conundrum they were in. So I think it's actually going to work out mutually for both of them because Baker should have a shot. This could be the most talented offense he's ever been in, honestly, with Mike Evans and Chris Godwin. So we'll have to see, but I think it's going to be mutually beneficial for both. The Carolina Panthers have had a big offseason going up and trading for the number 1 overall pick, but they also signed wide receiver Adam Thielen, tight end Hayden Hurst, safety Von Bell, running back Miles Sanders, wide receiver DJ Chark, quarterback Andy Dalton, and defensive tackle Shai Tuttle. Some key departures for them were wide receiver DJ Moore, which they traded away in order to acquire the number 1 overall pick, quarterback Sam Darnold, and running back Deonta Foreman. Some notable players that remain unsigned for them is defensive tackle Matt Ioannidis. So, Joe, what grade do you give the Carolina Panthers?
Yeah, I'm giving the Panthers an A. I like the Von Bell signings, Miles Sanders, the guys that they've added. I knew David Tepper is an aggressive owner, and he wasn't going to sit around and, wait for quarterbacks anymore. I didn't expect that he'd go up to the number 1 pick, but, they did an aggressive move, and, I'm excited to see who they take number 1 now.
I honestly have loved what the Panthers have done. I also gave them an A. I'll explain why I didn't give them an A plus in a little bit, but, I agree with you. Be aggressive. Get the guy that you want. It's the perfect combination of owner and head coach. I love the Frank Reich signing as their head coach and the staff that he's brought along with him, with quarterback Josh McCown being the quarterback coach, bringing in Deuce Staley. I just think the team that he has brought together in Carolina is just an exceptional staff. And, he dealt with the carousel in Indianapolis, which eventually they booted him. So now it's like, what? I'm coming in. I want to get the guy I want out of college, kind of develop him the way I want to develop him. So to me, I think it's a great move. And I love the additions they've made elsewhere. I think Miles Sanders having that familiarity with Deuce Staley. I think, they need a running back. I think he's a great player. DJ Chark has a lot of potential. You've already heard, Frank Reich say we really want to develop the route tree for him. So I think, his best years could definitely be ahead of him. You got a veteran like Adam Thielen and Von Bell who have been, starters for a long time in this league that can bring that leadership and that production. So I really, really like what they've done. The only reason why I don't give them an A plus is because in that trade, they do lose DJ Moore. It's hard to give an A plus when you leave a cornerstone player like that. But at the end of the day, they had to do what they had to do to get the guy that they want, and I understand that. So that's why I give them an A.
Yeah, the DJ Moore part definitely was tough, but I think that's a small price to pay if you can find your guy in the quarterback of your future. That's first and foremost, and I think they filled in the pieces decently well. Adding DJ Chark and Thielen to the wide receiver room. So I think they can weather that storm okay.
The New Orleans Saints were able to reunite quarterback Derek Carr with his former head coach Dennis Allen. They also signed running back Jamal Williams, wide receiver Brian Edwards, and safety Jonathan Abram. Some key departures for them were defensive tackle David Onyemata, linebacker Caden Ellis, defensive end Marcus Davenport, quarterback Andy Dalton, wide receiver Deontay Hardy, and wide receiver Marquez Callaway. And some notable players that remain unsigned for them are wide receiver Jarvis Landry, quarterback Brandley Roby, and running back Mark Ingram. So, Joe, what grade do you give the New Orleans Saints?
Yeah, I'm giving the Saints a B for their, offseason thus far. I like them bringing in Jamal Williams. I like him. I like his run style, and he's, has a knack for falling into the end zone, as we've seen with the Lions. Brian Edwards was interesting. He's got that rapport with Derek Carr from the Raider days. He's never really been able to, pan out from the hype that he got his rookie year. Interested to see what he does. And, I like them bringing in Jonathan Abram. He's not necessarily a household name in safety, but just like how he flies all over the field. And he's a very physical player. Curious to see if they end up possibly moving him to linebacker, because that's the one knack, I think. I feel like he would be a great special teams player, linebacker, just the way he can flow and get to the ball and make tackles. But, I don't love the Derek Carr signing, honestly. I think he's a solid quarterback, but he's just never been able to really, win the big games, or the teams that he's been on. He's been on more talented Raiders teams, and they haven't won that many games. Got to the one playoff game and lost against the Bengals.
See, I'm going to disagree with you there, Joe. I think we're going to find out who's right about this one. But I gave the Saints a B+. I like the Derek Carr move. Dennis Allen needed a guy like Derek Carr. Last year with the Jameis Winston, Andy Dalton, Taysom Hill combo was not going to cut it. And Dennis Allen, this is his second go-around as a head coach. He was a head coach with the Raiders, did not fare well, drafted Derek Carr, because of, I think, kind of him being good buddies with Sean Payton and knowing that organization. He was able to step in and be the head coach, but I think his seat's hot. And I think that he needed somebody like Derek Carr to come in and bring some stability to that offense. And honestly, the NFC South is really wide open. I think the Saints have a great opportunity. And I don't know how they do it. Mickey Loomis, I have to look at how he does things, but man, that guy is like a cap master. All the gymnastics he does, they were way over the cap. For them to be able to pull a rabbit out of their hat and get Derek Carr with that contract is something else. Really like the Jamal Williams signing with the Alvin Kamara legal troubles kind of, hovering over this team and him. I think they needed a complimentary running back, and I think they're going to have to rely on Jamal Williams quite a bit next year. So really like that move. One thing I am kind of curious about, I'm not a Michael Thomas fan. I think Michael Thomas is, he just can't stay healthy. They were able to renegotiate a contract with him to be able to stay with the team. That contract was really unfriendly. I thought he was going to be good as gone. I think they would have been better off just moving off of him, honestly, and just starting over. I do like Brian Edwards. Bring some potential to that room. And when he was good, it was with Derek Carr. So I'm curious to see what ends up happening with the Saints going into the draft here in the next few weeks.
Yeah, it's gonna be interesting to see, how they add to the receiver room. I think that's, one of their main weaknesses. They have Olave, and then it's like they don't have much else. I agree with you. I think they should have just moved on from Michael Thomas. I think it would have been a good separation for him to get a change of scenery, and the Saints just to move on to some newer, younger players.
The Atlanta Falcons were quite active this free agency period. Some key additions for them. They signed safety Jesse Bates. Were able to re-sign offensive tackle McGarry, linebacker Caden Ellis. Were able to sign defensive tackle Calais Campbell and David Onyemata, and quarterback Taylor Heineke. Some key departures for them were former starter last year quarterback Marcus Mariota, and a notable player that remains unsigned for them is linebacker Rashaan Evans. So, Joe, you thought pretty highly of the Falcons. What grade did you give them?
Yeah, I gave them an A- for the moves. I really like them being able to get Jesse Bates. Their secondary was really bad. They needed somebody like him to be a difference maker there. And then I loved the Calais Campbell move. He's an older veteran player who they could use their leadership on, especially, in the locker room. They're a pretty young team, and they're going to, go with Ritter, a young quarterback, so they're going to need some veteran leadership. And then, I like them adding Onyemata too to that defensive line. And then you get Taylor Heineke. He's a solid backup quarterback in this league. I don't know if he'll ever get a chance to really be a starter, but he's a solid backup and brings a lot of, fire and leadership as well.
So I was just taking a little quick peek of all of our grades as we've been going through it. And I want to say this might be the grade that I disagree with you the most on. I'm quite shocked that you give them this high of a grade. I gave them a B. I personally don't know what the Falcons are doing. I think that Arthur Smith's probably one of my least favorite coaches in the NFL. I just don't really know what plan that they're going with. Rashaan Evans had, I believe, over 150 tackles last year. They decide to not keep him and go with Caden Ellis. So maybe I'm not reviewing the tape correctly. I know they brought in a new new defensive coordinator, from the New Orleans Saints. So there's that familiarity with Ellis and Onyemata. And that's a part of the reason why they were targeted in free agency. So I get that. They have that familiarity with coordinator and player. I do like the safety Jesse Bates signing. I really do. I think he's a great player for them. But I'm going to disagree with you on the Heineke move. I'm not a big fan of Ritter, and I think they need something more than Heineke. I think they should be getting a quarterback in the first round if it was me. But I don't know. To me, it's okay, and that's why I gave them a B. So I'm not necessarily I hate it. I just am shocked how high you grade them, because to me, I don't feel like they have a concrete plan.
Yeah, well, it'll be interesting to see, what their plan is. It might not look like it, but I'm sure they do in the background here. And they, Rashaan Evans is out there. Just because they haven't brought him back doesn't mean that they won't. But I think Caden Ellis possibly could be an upgrade from Rashaan Evans. I know he had over 100 tackles, but you watch him play for the Saints last year, and he did a lot of good things for the Saints, and I like him as a player.
Well, I guess you're a believer in their plan. I think they're flying by the seat of their pants, but we're going to find out.
Yeah, well, one thing with Arthur Smith is that, he likes to run the ball, so it might not necessarily matter, if who he's got back there at quarterback as much.
So transitioning over to the NFC West, the San Francisco 49ers key additions were defensive tackle Javon Hargrave, quarterback Sam Darnold, offensive lineman Jake Brendel, and kicker Zane Gonzalez, who they traded for. Some key departures for them: quarterback Jimmy Garoppolo, offensive tackle Mike McGlinchey, defensive end Samson Abukum, defensive tackle Charles Omenihu, safety Jimmy Ward, cornerback Emmanuel Mosley, and linebacker Azeez Al-Shaair. It's a lot of departures for the 49ers. Some notable players that remain unsigned for them are defensive end Kerry Hyder, cornerback Jason Verrett, and kicker Robbie Gould. So, Joe, what grade do you give the San Francisco 49ers?
Yeah, giving them a B- for their offseason. Obviously, they were able to land the best defensive tackle on the market, Javon Hargrave. I thought it was interesting, them bringing in Sam Darnold. We'll see. I believe Brock Purdy is going to be the guy going forward. I don't know, obviously he's going to be competing for one of the backup spots, but then also going to be interested to see what happens with Trey Lance as well. That quarterback room certainly is interesting. Bringing in Zane Gonzalez, there's been a lot of kicker moves this offseason, which has been, pretty interesting. But, I feel like, their departures were kind of to be expected. They were a team that didn't have a ton of cap space. They got a very talented roster, and they always seem to figure things out when they lose people.
Yeah, I mean, was just a slight disagreement with you here. I gave them a C plus, only a little bit less. I agree with you. I think they weathered the storm pretty well. They did lose some key departures, in my opinion. I think that's where maybe I feel a little more stronger than you do. Guys like Azeez Al-Shaair, they weren't starters for them, but I think, like Azeez Al-Shaair could do really well with his next team. But I don't know, losing Mike McGlinchey, that'll be interesting. I mean, he was a really solid offensive tackle for them, and that's not easy to replace. I'm with you. It's sort of the Sam Darnold signing is very interesting to me. I like it for him. I just wonder what it means for the rest of that room. We already have heard conversation, from their GM that Purdy's pretty much got the job. But then you got Lance, with the high draft capital that they have with him, and what chances he have. Does Darnold leapfrog him? And then if that happens, do they just trade Lance at that point? Just he's a sunk cost. You try to get as much as you can out of him. But with Purdy and that UCL, I think it's going to take a while for him to get healthy. So I guess it's extra insurance for them. I'm really curious to see how it all pans out. And then I do like the Hargrave move. That was a great move. That was their best move of the offseason.
Yeah, no doubt. I think the Sam Darnold move was a lot just an insurance policy with everything that happened to them last year. In the playoffs against in the Eagles game where they just Purdy gets hurt, Garoppolo wasn't available, and then they're just kind of got two other guys who, they just had on the roster, and then they also got injured. So definitely gives them more insurance with the Darnold signing.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that if I have all three will be active every game day for them.
Absolutely.
The Seattle Seahawks had some key additions as well as some re-signings. They decided to sign cornerback Geno Smith to a long-term extension, signed defensive tackle Draymond Jones, safety Julian Love, brought back beloved linebacker Bobby Wagner, and a reunion of defensive tackle Jerron Reed, and also signed linebacker Devin Bush. Some key departures for them were linebacker Cody Barton and running back Rashad Penny. Some notable players that remain unsigned for them are defensive tackle Shelby Harris, defensive tackle Poona Ford, and defensive tackle Quentin Jefferson. So, Joe, what grade do you give the Seattle Seahawks?
Yeah, I've liked what the Seahawks have done so far. I gave them an A. They've had a solid offseason, starting with shoring up Geno Smith, who surprisingly had a really good year last year. Not sure anyone was really expecting that, possibly other than the Seahawks themselves. I thought Draymond Jones was an interesting signing for them. He's a player that, as long as he's been healthy, he's been really good. Of course, from my fellow Bronco player, I really like Julian Love. He had a great year last year with the Giants. Good young safety that they really could use. With the uncertainty they have with Jamal Adams, and his availability hasn't been the same the last couple of years. Bringing back Bobby Wagner, I think, was huge, especially after them losing Cody Barton. Bobby Wagner, I know he's old, but he can still play, and he has an impact on the defense.
I absolutely love what the Seattle Seahawks did. I also gave them an A. I was very close to giving them an A+. I think the key additions that they brought to this team, I think, are going to have an immense impact. And they really didn't lose all that much. Penny could never stay healthy, and they already have Kenneth Walker, and then Barton goes, but you bring back Bobby Wagner. I don't think they ever really should have let him go. He had a great year with the Rams, but he's just one of those players that's just a cornerstone player, a guy you'd like to see just play from the beginning to his career to the end of his career with the same team. So I think it's going to be great having him back with that leadership. I'm also kind of interested about Devin Bush, them kicking the tires on him with Jordan Brooks having that ACL tear. I think he might not even play next season. So it's going to be an audition for him to try to kind of recreate his value. So that'll be really interesting. But yeah, Draymond Jones is a great player. Like you mentioned, Julian Love had a great year with the New York Giants. Him coming in to that safety room is going to give them extra insurance. So overall, I really think they've done a great job. The one thing that I'm a little reluctant about is the Geno Smith contract. Now, I believe they can get out of it after a year. So, essentially they're not going to be on the hook for very long. But I think it'll be interesting to see what they do with the draft. They've got obviously 2 first-round picks, one really high one because of the Denver Broncos trade with Russell Wilson, and then being in the top 10, which nobody was expecting. To me, they need to draft a quarterback. Geno Smith is not going to be the quarterback that's going to bring them to the Super Bowl. He was able to bring them to the playoffs, but they need somebody who can take them all the way there. And if they do draft that quarterback, and I like the quarterback that they draft after the end of all this, they will definitely get an A+ for the offseason. But I want to see what they do. But they're very close to getting an A+ in my mind.
Yeah, to me, they got to take a quarterback at 5. I mean, like you said, Geno Smith is basically, this upcoming season, then they can get out of it. And then really they've only got Drew Lock behind them. So they got to do something. And I would be absolutely stunned if they didn't address the quarterback position at 5.
I think Anthony Richardson would be the like a beautiful, like the cherry on top for this offseason. Guy who can sit behind Geno for a year, be able to kind of work out his accuracy issues or what have you, and work with the coaching staff, kind of have that redshirt year. I think he would be the perfect fit for that team.
Yeah, the question will be, will he last that long all the way to pick 5? I mean, he's a guy that dazzled in the combine and kind of flew up on everyone's radar. I feel like somebody could draft him before 5.
The LA Rams had no key additions to their team. Some notable departures, and they had many. They traded away cornerback Jalen Ramsey. They lost linebacker Bobby Wagner to the Seattle Seahawks. Quarterback Baker Mayfield, safety Nick Scott, defensive tackle Greg Gaines, safety Taylor Rapp, and kicker Matt Gay. And some notable players that remain unsigned for them are defensive end Leonard Floyd, defensive tackle Ashawn Robinson, and cornerback Troy Hill. So, Joe, what grade do you give the LA Rams?
Yeah, I gave them a D-. They haven't really done anything, but this is also the result of when you trade away all your picks for a long time and don't have first-round picks, and then you also just spend a lot of money year in and year out, and eventually, you got to have one of these seasons where you just got to take things on the chin and let a lot of guys go, and you can't really bring anyone in. So it definitely will be interesting to see what this Rams team looks like when everything's said and done at the start of the season.
Are you taking notes, Joe, for your dynasty team?
Yeah, I mean, this is probably, what the Rams are doing this year, I very well could be doing in the next couple of years. Absolutely. Because I've kind of used their model of, trading picks away and being very aggressive in free agency. I just hope that, maybe this year this year's like my window. So if I can't get it done, then I'll be disappointed because at least the Rams got a Super Bowl out of it.
See, I gave them an F for a grade. And I understand what you're saying, and that the move, basically, it was a trade-off. The moves that they made allowed them to get a Super Bowl. So you're basically like, I accept it. But I look at this as a completely new calendar year. And as far as their performance this offseason, it's been absolutely abysmal. I mean, they have not added anybody to this team. They've lost key playmakers to this team, people that really make up their core. I have no idea why Sean McVay has come back. He was on the fence about coming back. I can't see how this team's going to be any more competitive. Matthew Stafford and his back injury, looms large. He says he's coming back. He's not going to retire, but one bad hit for him, and he's going to retire. It'd be a career injury. So, and then I don't even know why Aaron Donald wants to come back. Honestly, I can't see how this team's going to be able to compete. So, I understand that they were up against the cap and their hands were kind of forced, but I don't give them a pass for that. It'll be interesting to see if they can bring back guys like Leonard Floyd and Ashawn Robinson. I'm actually really surprised Ashawn Robinson's still out there. Not maybe a household name, but is really good, a run defender. He doesn't get a lot of sacks or pass rush. So I don't know, maybe they will be able to kind of do some patchwork and bring some of those guys back, but I can't see how I could give them anything better than an F because they've done absolutely nothing, and now this team is hurting.
Yeah, I do agree with you in the sense of I have no idea why Sean McVay would want to come back to this team, and I think, honestly, Matt Stafford should retire. I don't know why he would want to come back to this team either, and with his neck injury and stuff, it's just too dangerous. I think it'd be best for him, and honestly maybe best for the Rams if he just retired and doesn't put his life in danger.
The Arizona Cardinals had some key additions to their team. They signed linebacker Kaiser White, were able to bring back offensive tackle Kelvin Beachum and offensive lineman Will Hernandez, and signed wide receiver Zach Pascal. Some key departures for them were defensive tackle Zach Allen and cornerback Byron Murphy. And some notable players that remain unsigned for them are wide receiver Chosen Anderson. Yes, his name was Robbie Anderson before he changed his name to Chosen, just so we're all aware. Offensive lineman Rodney Hudson and defensive end Marcus Golden. So, Joe, what grade do you give the Arizona Cardinals?
Yeah, I'm giving them a C-. A lot of it has to do with them moving on from Cliff Kingsbury and bringing in a new head coach and getting maybe re-energizing that locker room that really needs it with some new life and new ideas. I like that they brought in Kaiser White. He's a talented linebacker that had a good year last year. And then they shore up the offensive line a little bit, which they needed to do with Kelvin Beachum and Will Hernandez. Zach Pascal actually could be an interesting move for them in the wide receiver move. We're still waiting to see what's going to happen with DeAndre Hopkins. And then from after that, they've got Marquise Hollywood Brown and, Greg Dortch, but Pascal provides a lot of good potential there at the wide receiver spot.
Yeah, I got to be honest. I think your grade is very generous to the Arizona Cardinals. I gave them a D minus. I'm with you. I think it was best for them to move off of Cliff Kingsbury. I just think the tension was palpable between him and Kyler Murray. As us fans watching the game, you could almost see it on the sideline. That's just not how it's supposed to work between your franchise quarterback and your head coach. But I'm not convinced that Jonathan Gannon was the right guy. I think that, he's a defensive-minded head coach. So there's nothing wrong with a defensive-minded head coach. But I just wonder if they should have tried to find a different offensive-minded head coach to pair with Kyler Murray. Kyler Murray plays a different style of quarterback, and I think that's a part of the reason why Kingsbury was brought in. It didn't work. But I don't know if Gannon's the right guy for them. And so to me, that's a part of the reason why I give him this grade. As well as, losing Zach Allen, not a household name. He's a great player. Cornerback Byron Murphy, he is a great player, but he's not a household name. They didn't really bring anybody in. And the other thing I really don't like about this team, and maybe they're tanking. They could be tanking this upcoming season to then maybe are they in maybe they'll have the number 1 pick in 2024. It's totally possible. But what doesn't make sense to me is Kyler Murray might not be able to play for most of the year next year. So they were not in the market at all for backup quarterbacks. I think they still have Colt McCoy on the roster, but are you really going to roll with Colt McCoy as your starting quarterback next year when Jonathan Gannon's coming out and saying they're going to try to still be a competitive team? I mean, Carson Wentz is still out there. Maybe they bring in a guy like him, but he brings a lot of controversy with him. So I don't understand what they're trying to do there. And it wouldn't make sense to me that they would want to have a top pick in 2024 because Kyler Murray, they gave that huge contract extension. I think Murray's their guy. So I'm a little confused by that.
I don't think they're in the tank for Caleb sweepstakes.
I was just going to say, I think they maybe are tanking for Caleb Williams. That's kind of what I'm wondering about as well. But it doesn't make sense then with Murray in the mix. You know what I'm saying? Like, I think a part of the reason why you bring in a guy like Gannon is because you try to fix the offense and work with Kyler Murray because of that contract.
I mean, I don't know. I have my doubts on Kyler Murray. We'll see what happens. But, at the end of the day, they have new coaching. They're going to have a new direction. And maybe Kyler's just not a part of the plans. And, it might be exciting if they do the tank for Caleb strategy. We already saw, the previous, before they had Kyler Murray, they drafted Josh Rosen high. Yeah, they draft Josh Rosen with the first round pick. Then the very next year they have the number 1 pick and they take Kyler Murray, and they had Cliff Kingsbury, thought that it was going to work out. So they've already shown in the past that they've been able to do that. So maybe tank for Caleb is their strategy.
So that concludes our free agency grades for every NFC conference team. If you enjoyed this content, we encourage you to please like this video so others can find it and subscribe to our YouTube channel. We've also recently joined Spotify and Apple Podcasts, so you can add us there as well. If you haven't already, check out our other video where we talked about the AFC conference teams. We're going to be talking about the offseason in length as we go on here, and we'll give out grades after the NFL draft and tell you what we thought, how teams did based on who they drafted. But thank you so much for watching, and until next time.